Okay, here we go. This is Marty Wilson speaking. It's February 11th, 2025. I'm sitting at the Monroe County Historical Association with Mr. Patrick Conway, and Patrick's here to talk about his days in Vietnam. Tanya's in the room with me. And so Patrick, where and when were you born?
I was born July 20th, 1947 at St. Mary's Hospital in Orange, New Jersey.
And you grew up in Orange, New Jersey, or?
No. I was about 4 or 5 when we left New Jersey.
Where'd you grow up then, most of your?
Well, mostly between Indiana. I lived there for a while, in Florida. Lived there for a while, a short stint in Puerto Rico, and then back to New Jersey, and then back to Pennsylvania.
You lived in Puerto Rico for a while?
A very short time. My father actually passed away while we were down there, so we were going to be there for quite a while, but that changed everything, you know.
Your dad, I know just before we turned the machine on, but he wasn't connected to the military, or?
He worked as a civilian for the Navy Department.
Oh, okay.
In World War II.
All right.
But no, he was not in the military.
Okay. So where did you go to high school?
I went to Christopher Columbus High School in Miami, Florida, and then graduated from St. Joseph's High School in West New York, New Jersey.
You moved around a lot.
Yes, we did. Taught me how to make friends and influence people.
So let's get to your Vietnam experience. I mean, do you remember the first time you heard about Vietnam? Were you the kind of kid that followed those stories in the news, or?
Yeah, but I remember it as a young man. They had another name for Vietnam.
Indochina?
Indochina, French Indochina. That's what it was, up until 1954 anyway, when Dien Bien Phu happened and they kicked the French out. But so I mean, I knew of it. I've heard of it, but I didn't follow it. You know, I was a teenage kid.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I was more interested in the dances.
Did you go on to college or not?
I went to Seton Hall University for 2 years.
Uh-huh. What did you study? Curious. What was your major?
I majored in business administration, industrial relations.
So I can't do the math quickly enough in my head. What year are we talking about when you were in college?
65 through 67, actually.
So that's when the wars started to be.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
When I got drafted, I was one of, if you remember, they call it McNamara's 500,000. That when I went in 1968, when I went to Vietnam, that was the highest number of troops that we had on the ground in Vietnam at any time.
So how is it that you got drafted if you were in college?
Well, I actually left college. A quick backstory. I wasn't happy with my major in college. It was most of my family. They wanted me to go into business administration. That's where you got to go. And I actually wanted to be a photographer. Or the other thing that fascinated me, I don't know if I could have done it, but archaeology. So after 2 years of business administration and a year in ROTC, I just decided this wasn't for me. But I did go to night school for a while, but I lost my deferment. So I knew I was going to end up in the military, so I pretty much just let it happen, you know.
ROTC?
Yeah, I was in ROTC for a year.
Why did you do ROTC?
It was actually, it was mandatory when you went to Seton Hall University. Seton Hall, back in the 60s, you know, you had your hawks and your doves, if you remember that. Mm-hmm. Well, Seton Hall was a hawk university.
Yeah.
You know, was not liberal left wing by any means, you know.
Huh. So do you remember, before you were drafted, having any kind of opinion about what was going on in Vietnam?
Probably as I got closer to facing the reality of going into the military, yeah. But then again, there was a lot of conflicting information. I do remember when I was inducted that, and this, I'm not blaming the Army for this, but really blaming some of the individuals in the Army. they like to tell you that how they were war heroes in Vietnam, and half these guys had never left Fort Dix, New Jersey. So I kind of, after a little while of hearing this, I kind of said, this doesn't jive, But,
are we talking about people that were training you, or just other guys?
Some of them were training, some of them were basically supply and administrative people,
And there was some kind of cachet to be gained by imitating a war hero, or
well, because we were coming in, we don't know anything. We're just a bunch of new guys. Are scared. We don't know which way we're going or what's going to happen. So these guys, they sounded pretty tough,
Ah.
That way.
So, well, let's talk about you getting drafted. What were you doing when you got your draft notice?
I was actually working in a photography shop and going to night school at the time.
And were you upset about getting the draft, or you just expected it was going to happen?
I think I was pretty much consigned to the idea that it was going to happen.
All right.
All
right. Well, talk about your basic training. Where did you do basic training and all that stuff?
Fort Dix, New Jersey.
Uh-huh.
And from there I went to Fort Polk, Louisiana for infantry school.
So you had infantry training.
Yeah.
And was it pretty clear from the moment you got your letter welcoming you into the Army, right? The Army.
Yeah.
That you were going to Vietnam? Was it pretty clear?
Not until I got to Fort Polk. Fort Polk was called Tigerland, home of the combat infantrymen for Vietnam. Had a big banner as you entered Fort Polk that said that. And the only thing I could think of was Dante's Inferno. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here.
Where is Fort Polk? Where is that?
It's in central Louisiana.
What was that like?
Horrible.
Yeah.
The weather, and I think the weather was worse than Vietnam.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, it was hot. Well, I was there in August, September, October. So it was pretty hot and sticky.
Yeah.
And we lived in the old World War II barracks. There was no such thing as air conditioning or anything like that. But a lot of physical training. One of my first introductions to the, I don't know what the proper word is in the Army, but they'd load us up at 6 o'clock in the morning and take us out to a range somewhere for training for the day. And usually you have an instructor out there, E6 or E7 sergeant, and they'd start off by saying, "You'll never use this in Vietnam, but the Army says we have to teach it to you anyway." What they were teaching us was classical World War II European battlefield techniques. And they're right. We were jungle fighters when we got to Vietnam. It had very little application other than psyching your mind up, for the war. The last week of infantry school, because school was 8 weeks, they added a 9th week on, was our RVN orientation, Republic of Vietnam. And that's the first time I ever got my hands on an M16. And we went out into the field with a poncho and a butt pack, and pretty much lived in the forest and simulated combat. Which the ironic part about it was we had M16s, we had no ammo, no blanks or anything. So if we were simulating combat, we had to yell bang bang like little kids playing war.
So why did they insist on giving you World War II training? Do you think it was just institutional inertia or something? Or?
I guess that the reality hadn't caught up to the Army yet in their training manuals. It served a purpose in a sense of teamwork and things like that, some ways to survive. But that week of RVN was closer to reality than anything else. And then when I went to Vietnam, it was right after that, I ended up spending a week in the 90th Replacement Battalion pulling guard duty, which was kind of nice because usually when you get to a replacement battalion, you're in and out in a day or two to whatever unit you're going to be assigned to. But I spent 5 days there, which, you know, that's all good time, you know, counts toward your tour. So this is another one of the kind of odd things about the Army. That one day the cadre guys came down and said, "Oh, you got a good assignment coming up. You're going to be going to 196 Light Infantry. That's Saigon support. You'll have it made." And then the orders came down the next day, 101st Airborne Division, up in Phu Bai, up in the northern part of South Vietnam. You know, that was, my whole time in the Army was like that. You know, you'd be told one thing and you end up going somewhere else. It's part of Army life. But they had when I was assigned to the division, I had to go to CERTS, with the Screaming Eagle Replacement Training School. And this was a 5-day course that the division taught to new guys. And this was staffed and run by guys that were on their second tour in Vietnam. Had a combat tour and then came back to run the school. And I learned a lot more in those 5 days than I did in 8 weeks of infantry training, because it was geared toward what we were facing, which was essentially either jungle fighting or around little villages. You know, so we learned a lot of things.
Well, before we get to Vietnam, I'm just that little space of time between. Did you get a letter? So, and people talk about getting their orders. How's that happen? How did you know you were going to Vietnam? How were you informed?
Actually, probably the day I graduated from infantry school is when I knew I was going to Vietnam.
And they just announced it to the class, or they give you a letter or something? Or?
I had a letter, but then, you know, yeah.
They didn't know.
We got a letter. Everybody had a joke about the letter you got when you were drafted, because it started off by saying greetings from the President of the U.S. You know, but yeah, because I remember that when we got our orders that we were going to be going to Vietnam, the company that graduated the school before us all went to Germany. But most companies went to Vietnam out of Fort Polk, you know. In essence, I don't know if that was a bad thing, because Germany was all spit and polish. There was no real war going on, so they had nothing to do but make you polish your shoes and, you know, starch your fatigues and stuff like that.
Did you have time? Did they tell you you're going to Vietnam, and then you had like a couple of weeks off, or how'd that work?
Like, you had 15 days leave.
And that's not particularly memorable time for you, and no woman back home or anything, no girlfriend or.
Actually, I did. I was engaged to a girl, and it didn't. She couldn't make the whole year, and so I got the Dear John letter.
Oh, no kidding! While you were in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's what I came home to. Which, again, looking back on it, I'd rather she did it then and not when after we got married.
Yeah.
You know, so it was probably a good thing.
Well, then let's get you to Vietnam. How did you get to Vietnam?
Flew over. Flying Tiger Airlines, which is a contract carrier for the government. On a 707 Intercontinental jet. It was a long fuselage body. And it took us 3 days to fly to Vietnam, because we flew to Anchorage and we landed there, and the hydraulic system failed on the plane. So they put us up in a hotel in Anchorage, spent the night there, you know. Next day, we got on the plane, took off, and we were maybe 20 minutes in the air. They had to turn around and go back to Anchorage because the hydraulic system failed again on the plane. So some of us, you know, spent the day in the bar. So we didn't really care about flying where we flew to after that. But we went to Yokota Air Base. That's in Japan. And that's where we landed. Hydraulic system failed again. Okay. So we stayed overnight at Yokota Air Base. Finally, after the third day, we got to land at Tonsanut in Saigon. And that's another thing, you know, about the misconceptions. And I've talked to other guys that had the same feeling that I did. I thought they were going to open the door to the plane, hand me an M16, and I have to fight my way in the terminal. But it wasn't like that at all. It was like landing anywhere else, except for the horrible heat and humidity, you know.
Yeah, what was that like walking off the plane and having that hit you?
Wham!
Yeah.
It was like South Carolina at its worst.
Yeah.
But you got used to it, of course. You know.
So then what happens? You get into Saigon, and then how does it work? Can you walk us through those first few days till you're...
Well, they threw us on a bus, took us to the 90th Replacement Battalion. And again, that was just a spot they put you to. They got your orders where you're going, what unit you were going to.
So you end up in this place, and then somebody out in the field says, we need somebody, and that, so you're sent out to that group of men? Is that what the way?
Yeah, they would give you orders.
But individually, right? I mean, you're not moving as a unit.
No, not like in previous wars where the whole unit went over. That was one of the things that actually contributed to the horrible PTSD problems that most of us suffered when we came back. You know, I can go into that a little bit later.
Sure.
But yeah, it's they took, after my few days I spent there as guard duty, they took me out back to Tonsanut, and I hopped on a C-130. That's the workhorse of the military, you know, and flew up to Phu-Bai, which was up in what they call I Corps, the northern part of South Vietnam, and that's where the 101st Airborne base camp was.
So I have two quick questions.
Sure.
I don't want to interrupt your story, but number one, M16, are you carrying a rifle all the time with you, or how's that work?
No, I wasn't carrying a rifle when we flew up there, but I got assigned one right after we got to the unit.
Okay.
You know.
And the second question, how long of a flight was it? I mean, what kind of distances are we talking?
It's a couple hours, I think.
Okay.
If I remember right. I could be a little off on that.
All right. So you land in this airport up in the north.
Yeah. Up at the Phu-Bai airport, I guess. And interesting thing, I'd only ever flown in commercial jets. Well, this wasn't even a jet, they were turboprops. There was no insulation inside them. It was just the skin of the plane. Now, if any of you ever flew on a commercial jet, you know, when you land, you feel a little thump and that's it. Not in one of these things. They sound like they're going to fall apart on the runway. Bang, creak, groan, moan. You know, I wasn't used to that at all. You know. But,
well, so what happened when you got up there?
Well, they took us over to the unit, and I was assigned to the 2nd 327th Airborne Infantry.
But again, getting back to what you're... the individual thing versus the unit thing. I mean, you're in a big plane with a bunch of other guys. When you land there, does everybody go off in different directions?
Yeah, depending. You may have had a bunch of guys going to the same division, but not necessarily to the same battalion, you know, or guys going to other units. Yeah. I mean, we were in the plane flying over from America. You know, it was like 250 guys that were going to Vietnam, and that's all we knew.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I have to I need to explain something here because it was the 101st Airborne Division. You probably heard of them from like D-Day and World War II.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of our fire bases over there were named after the big battles they had, like Birch's Garden and stuff like that. And the name of my battalion was the 2nd 327th Airborne Infantry, but we weren't airborne. I was not airborne. I never trained in jump school. So, you know, I was what they called a leg, straight leg infantry. The airborne concept didn't work in Vietnam. The 173rd Airborne Brigade tried it and found out you don't jump into triple canopy jungle. It's just, you know, it doesn't work. So essentially, we were an air mobile unit, meaning helicopters took us out to the battle, so to speak. You know, big controversy over that because while the unit was in Vietnam, somewhere along 1967 maybe, they changed the name of the 101st Airborne Division to the 101st Air Assault Division. Well, all the World War II guys in the division association, they lost it. It was actually to the point where they had to change the name back. So they called it the 101st Airborne Division, parentheses, Air Mobile. You know, so that's technically what we were known as.
Well, when did you get to Vietnam? What was the date, month and year, roughly?
That would have been the beginning of October of 1968.
Okay, so Ted's already.
Well, that was in January and February.
Yeah.
So that the 68 Tet was already in the history books.
Right, gotcha.
There was one in '69, but it didn't amount to anything. You know. But the 68 Tet, that's where Walter Cronkite lost the war for us.
Right. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, go ahead with your story. So you go from that airport and you're hooked up with what? Where do you go to? What? Fire base, or where do you go?
I went to Camp Eagle, which was our base camp, and at that point was a series of GP large tents, and that's all it was. By the time I came back into the base camp, they had changed and built what they called sea huts, SEA, Southeast Asia, and they were a wood frame with plywood sides and screen, open screen around the top, and a like a corrugated tin roof, you know. So,
but is this base surrounded by wire or something? I mean, are you vulnerable to attacks where you were?
oh yeah, we used to get rockets all the time in the base camp. And, they had a barber, was a Vietnamese fella that came in and did haircuts for people in the base camp. And one night they actually ran into a patrol outside of Viet Cong, and he turned out he was a major in the Viet Cong. So when he came in to do the haircuts, he was scoping out the base camp to see where things were.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Did they ever get him? I guess not. Huh? Did you guys ever get him? Did they?
Yeah, he didn't survive.
Oh yeah, no kidding.
You know. But so anyway, spent a few days in Camp Eagle, and this is kind of an interesting part of the story. I think I'm going to have to clean it up a little more. The battalion was commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Charles Beckwith. Charger was his call sign, and he was started in Korea in the Army, and was a battlefield commission in Korea, and he was known for being pretty tough. You know, he wouldn't wear a shirt unless he had to. Drank a lot of beer. Horrible language. Well, we all had horrible language when we were over there, but and he didn't stand on a lot of military formalities. As long as you were out in the field doing your job, body count was what everything was measured by. He was happy, you know. So there's four of us that went out to the field. The first thing we had to do was go to meet Colonel Beckwith. He had a little GP small tent. Was his office set up off QL1, which was Highway 1, was Interstate 95 in Vietnam, although it was a dirt road at the time. So we walk in, and he's sitting there, and he starts talking to us. And I realize this the only man I ever met that could look four people in the eye at the same time. He was an amazing individual. In the middle of his talk, he pointed at one of us. Thank God he didn't point at me, to another guy. He said, "Boy, you're going to die. you know why you're going to die, boy? Because you're going to screw up. Well, that's not what he said. That, was trying to get a little PG-13 here.
Yeah, gotcha.
And he said, one of my boys dies, I feel like writing a letter home to his mama, saying, Mama, your son died because he screwed up. And we're all like, no, sir, you can count on us, sir. Put the fear of whatever into us. He is well known in Army circles because after Vietnam, he founded Delta Force. So, matter of fact, I was in some, if you've ever heard of the Valor Clinic, they do a lot of counseling and such, and they have a Veterans Unstoppable program. It's a 3 weekends, one a month, at a house they have, and there's a lot of younger vets in there, Persian Gulf era vets. So I was talking to a couple of them, and one guy was in for quite a few years, and I mentioned Colonel Beckwith, and he looked up and goes, I read his book. This guy, he was my battalion commander.
Wow.
And
how old would he have been at that point?
Probably had to be at least in his 40s, maybe 50,
Okay, and you guys are 18, 19, 20 years old.
I was an old man when I went over. I was 20.
Wow.
Actually I was 21. I turned 21 in Fort Polk, Louisiana, so I was 21 when I got to Vietnam. We had a guy in my platoon who was 23 years old. We used to call him Pop.
You always see in movies, John Wayne and these guys, and they're in their 30s and 40s, and that's not the way it was. These are young people.
I think average age in Vietnam was of the younger troops was probably around 19.
Yeah.
World War II was 26, I think.
Yeah. So anyway, tell us what you did over there. I mean, what was your job?
Well, I was infantry. My job was to go kill the bad guys.
So on what they called search and destroy missions before they changed the name of it.
Yes, we were told that we went out. When I first got there, we did go out on search and destroy. Then the Army decided that didn't sound good on the 6 o'clock news at home, so they changed it to recon and force. Same thing, it's just a name change.
But what would it be like? You go out for how many days, how many men, that kind of stuff?
Well, when I first got there, we were working down along the coastal plains, north of Da Nang, in villages, basically securing the villages because the NVA would hide in the hills during the day, and then at night they would come down into the villages to try to get money or rice, whatever they could out in the villagers, and then head back up in the hills. Our job was to stop them. So pretty much those few months we spent there was we'd kick back during the day, and then at night, sundown, we'd go out and set up an ambush somewhere outside of one of the villages, wherever our intel said they thought the NVA would be coming in, and we'd just wait there for them.
How did you not fall asleep?
Well, we weren't up all night. We'd pull 100% alert up to, I think, 10 o'clock maybe. And then after that, we'd go to one man in each position. So, the first guy would be 2 hours, everybody else asleep, then he'd wake somebody else up, he'd do his 2 hours, and do that through the night. So you got some sleep. But then again, in the daytime, we didn't do anything. We just laid back in the village. Sometimes we'd throw people out of their hooch and take over their hooch, for the day, that kind of thing.
So how long would you be in a village like this? I'm sure it varied, but are we talking a day or two, 5 days, 10 days?
It depended. There was a whole string of villages, and we'd kind of move from one to the other depending on, again, where the intel said we had the best chance of intercepting the NVA coming in.
And then how often did you go back to get resupplied to a base?
Well, they would bring out our supplies every 5 days deuce-and-a-half trucks. They'd bring out clean fatigues, and each man would get 7 C ration meals and 3 alert meals. That's 2 meals a day for 5 days. Alert meals were a freeze-dried food, sort of the precursor to the MRIs, you know, like that. Now, when we were out in the Ashaw Valley, they had supply us with helicopters. There weren't any roads out there, you know. That was pretty primitive. But so we'd work, you know, from the whole area there. Probably 5 or 10 different villages that we might be in at any one particular time.
You must have had some scary experiences.
Yeah, yeah. It's scaring. It's a funny thing about that, about fear. Going back to the training that we had, they did some excellent things to dehumanize the enemy and teach you how to react in a situation. There was like on a rifle range, there was no targets; they were human silhouettes. You know, that we fired. Now that was to teach you to not hesitate to pull the trigger on somebody, things like that. And I do remember one thing that's really crazy. It wasn't me; it was everybody felt the same way. If we made contact, I can never remember being scared in a firefight. I just reacted. Did what I had to do. I reacted. After the firefight was over, and you kind of go back and sit down somewhere, and you'd start trembling. Like, oh my God, I could have been killed out there. And you'd shake until you calm down. You know, it's an odd thing though. The way it's all because of the training that we didn't think we were getting had that kind of an effect on us. You know, that we were able to react in a firefight. I mean, it's because you got to survive, but other people got to count on you to survive, or they have to, or I have to count on them to survive. So everybody's got to do their job.
So I'm trying to visualize this story. You're telling me, how often did you have firefights? I mean, it wouldn't be every night that you'd have.
No.
Would it be like once a week, once a month?
We could go sometimes a couple of weeks without any contact. You know, so it wasn't like you said every night. I mean, occasionally you might have a couple of nights in a row. I think we had one time we had a 3-day firefight. We trapped an NVA platoon inside a village, and they were trying to get out, and we were trying to keep them from getting out. So it was like 3 days of just pot shots at each other.
So you did see the enemy. I mean, in that case, but if you're out there at night and they're trying to infiltrate at night, were you firing into darkness or muzzle flashes, or did you actually see the guys? Well,
it depends on the moon, you know, how much light there was. We also had something called a starlight scope, which was about this big. And if you look through it, you could see at night. It was crazy. It was like a green field, and you could see shadow figures moving. Ours were this big. The ones that my son, who served in Iraq and Afghanistan, they had them too. You know what they were? They flipped them down on their helmet, like a business or like a credit card size. You know? I thought we were pretty high tech in 1968, but we were nothing compared to what they have today.
Yeah, sure.
You know, so yeah, and the worst comes to worst, and we did use these guys once in a while. You ever heard Spooky?
No.
Spooky was, they took some old C-47s, World War II aircraft, twin engine. They also were, the civilian version was a DC-3. Okay, that's what you see the guys in World War II movies jumping on them. Yeah. And they kind of cut the sides out of them because they could bank like this, something a jet could never do. And they put a couple of miniguns in the side of them, and we call them in, and they either drop illumination, and when they could, a whole area half the size of this town, they could illuminate for you, and then whatever moved, they had the miniguns, which was an awesome weapon. It was amazing how fast. It was like a Gatling gun, actually, with the rotating barrels. And I forget what the actual sustained rate of fire, thousands of rounds a minute. They fire out of those things, but yeah, one night we had an interesting experience because it got up close and personal, where the NVA were trying to get out of the village, and they walked right into our ambush in the middle of the night. And that was pretty intense.
It's hard for me to imagine, But anyway, did you ever get a chance to interact with the villagers in these villages?
Somewhat, yes. Somewhat.
I assume they couldn't speak English and you couldn't.
Yeah, there was a little bit of pidgin English.
Yeah.
Which was actually sort of a combination of English, French, and Vietnamese.
But you could make yourselves understood, or you could understand them?
Simple little things like Didi Mao, that meant move, get out of here. Dinky Dow. They say, GI, beaucoup Dinky Dow. Crazy. And little ways like that you could sometimes.
Was there a lot of hostility coming from the villagers?
Not really. They just were going. Their life hadn't changed in 1,000 years. They had no electricity or anything. Lived in little huts and picked rice.
So they just find themselves in the middle of this war.
Yeah, I remember there was one village. There was a little girl about, I think she might have been no more than 15, and she was half French and half Vietnamese, and so we called her Frenchie, and she spoke a little English. And I remember one time she said, "Why don't you all go? All go. You go, VC, all go home." That's all they wanted. Just leave us alone,
Well, you must have had other experiences at night on these not missions, but these confrontations. Are you interested in talking about any of those or not?
To some extent. I mean, I'll tell you a story that aggravates all my Marine friends. The Marines had a thing called the CAP teams, and the CAP teams would go. They would live in a village, and each village had like a Vietnamese National Guard. We used to call them the Rough Puffs. So the CAP teams were in charge of the Rough Puffs. So there might be 3 or 4 Marines in this CAP team, and a lot of times they would set their ambush up on this side of the village. Our ambush was on this side of the village, and if the NVA came in on their side, first shot that was fired, these Rough Puffs would drop their rifles and run back to the village, and they'd leave these 3 or 4 Marines in the middle of it all. We'd have to pull our ambush site in the middle of the night and run across the village to bail these guys out. Now, do you know what Marines feel like when they have to admit that the Army saved them?
I'll have to ask my brother.
Yeah, it doesn't go over well. But we did have one experience I wanted to tell you about. It's kind of humorous. Well, part of it is. We had to go up on a mountain overlooking Da Nang. There was evidently an F-4 had crashed up there, and our job was to go up and find it, which we never did. But so we go up on this mountain, and it was all socked in, like 2 or 3 days of nasty weather. And we were actually literally inside a cloud on top of the mountain. So we set up an NDP, a night defensive perimeter, and we were going to run some patrols out of that in the daytime. And this is one of those, one time I can honestly say something happened that, but for the grace of God, I wouldn't have come back. I'll explain that in a minute. My feet, from being immersed in the water, had turned into a giant white grape, and I couldn't walk anymore. So the medic looked at it, and he said, okay, we'll leave him back on castle guard, because 2 of us stayed back to guard the perimeter, and the rest of the platoon went out on the patrol. Now at that time, I carried an M79 grenade launcher. That was my weapon. And I had HE rounds, high explosive rounds, and also had shotgun rounds. So my job out in the point team, you had a point man, and that was pretty nerve-wracking. You were the first one to lead everybody through the trail. And then a slack man behind him just watched his rear, and I would have been the 3rd man in there. I walked what they called tree. I put a shotgun round in and watched the trees for snipers. That was my job. Well, the platoon ran into an NVA ambush. Turns out the NVA had like a whole regiment up on that mountain, and all 3 guys got hit. The point man, the slack man, and the 3rd guy, which would have been me. But I wasn't. I was back in the perimeter. And I said that day, if ever in my life I saw a miracle happen, well, I wasn't there to see it, but I mean, from what I understood, they called a medevac chopper in to get these guys out of there. The medevac couldn't find us because we were in the cloud, and they were talking on the radio with the helicopter, and they could hear them flying around, but we were just totally socked in, like ground zero. And at one point, all of a sudden, a break opened up in the clouds, and the helicopter was sitting almost right on top of us. Oh. He was able to come down, get the 3 guys out, and the cloud came back in. Now I'm not like an overly religious person, but that just said to me that was the hand of God.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, we spent another couple of days up there, and we ran out of water and food because they couldn't find us to resupply us. So finally, it was Christmas Eve day. We got down off that mountain, and it was right alongside Highway 1. There was a big open field, and a river ran across the highway there. So we wore the same fatigues for like 2 weeks, and we were getting a little funky. So we got down there, and we were told that the base camp was, since we were off the highway, they were bringing out clean fatigues, ammo, and mermite cans full of hot food for us. Usually it's like a macaroni and beef in a sauce type thing. So we heard that. Well, half of the guys ripped their fatigues off, ran in the river to clean up. Right? The other half stayed there just for guard duty and waited their turn. Well, here comes Captain Bramlett, our company commander, who was another very good guy I admired a lot. He was West Point Ranger Airborne, career man. Well, he calls a company formation. So now here we are, all stark naked, standing at attention. He says, "Men, I have received a communique from the Department of the Army declaring a 24-hour ceasefire that has been declared because of the Christmas holiday." And he goes on to read the official language and all that. And he stops and he says, "Now let me tell you what this really means. What this means is you can't shoot anybody unless you see them first." That was it. And now I know that it's not as humorous as it would sound telling the story, but for us, that was kind of funny.
So how long were you out there in this group, men doing this thing? Was that what you did the whole 12 months you were over there? No,
actually, I was one of the lucky few that I got a job in the base camp, and I said photography was my passion at one time, and I got to be good friends with one of the squad leaders, and he wanted to learn about photography. So we spent a lot of our downtime talking about photography and stuff. And that's how I got the job in the base camp. He had about a month left in country, and he fell off a cliff and broke both his feet. So they brought him back to the base camp, taped up his feet, and said, "Go sit over there till you go home." Really nothing much they could do with him. Well, he found out that the battalion was looking for a public information officer, so he put my name in for it, and that's how I got the job in the base camp. So I spent roughly 7 months or so in the field, and in the last 5 months in the base camp.
So that was much safer, of course, in the base camp.
Oh yeah.
But what public relations officer, what public are you relating to?
Well, it wasn't even an officer.
Oh, okay.
But it was a PIO man, they call it. And essentially what happened was I came in out of the field, and I dropped off my rucksack at the company area. I reported to S1, that's who I was working for. They handed me a camera and another rucksack and said, "Go back out with Delta Company, get some pictures." So that's what I did. That was my first time as a PIO man. I did get a picture published in the Screaming Eagle, it was the division newspaper, but they took all the credit for it. And I even complained that Captain Treesh was the S1. We got to be pretty good friends, and he tried to get my name, given the credit, but they wouldn't change it, But so I actually had 3 different jobs the time I was in there. I did the PIO for a while. The battalion mail clerk got malaria. So they come up and say, "Here, read these postal regulations. You're now the new battalion mail clerk." So I did that for a while, and then he came back, and the PDS NCO was going home. So I got that job, that was the personnel daily summary. My job was I had to account for everybody in the battalion every day, who was in the field, who was in the base camp, excuse me, who was on R&R, who was wounded, which actually led me to something. I didn't think about it much back then, but later on in life, as I got involved with VVA, one of the big issues that we contended with was the POWs and MIAs. There's plenty of evidence the government hid that we left people behind over there. Now, go back to 1969, every day I had to fill out this form. There was 4 names on there that were carried over from, I think, 1965 when the division first went to Vietnam. And they were listed as AWOL. 4 names. Now here, 4 years later, I'm just carrying these, I'd write them down this day, next time, write them down. I never found out anything about these 4 guys. And it didn't bother me until I started getting involved with the issues of the POWs. And it came to me, well, wait a minute, these 4 guys, they've never been accounted for, to my knowledge. What happened to them? And I wished I had written down their names, but I have no way to go back and look at it. The only thing I could think of is they faded into Thailand in the black market or something,
Or is it not possible they were just killed and their bodies never found? Or?
No, it would have been reported. If they were killed, they would have been killed in a unit action, and they would have been reported.
You mentioned earlier, and of course, Vietnam was different than World War II and other wars in that soldiers sort of went over there individually and not in units.
Yeah.
What was that like? Did you feel like an outsider when you first went, and how long did it take you to feel like you weren't an outsider? Or?
Well, yeah, because when you're the new guy, or the FNG, as we refer to, nobody wanted to make friends with you, and the reason being you didn't want to make friends with somebody who might get killed the next day. Or maybe after a while you become good friends and he'll get killed, and then you gotta deal with the loss of a friend. So it took a while, but eventually it all came around, and I was just another one of the guys.
But there must have been a constantly revolving crew, right? I mean, some guys are leaving, some guys are coming.
Yeah, a few here and there. I mean, one or two here and there, not a lot.
Yeah.
We were happy to see a guy go home. We'd be happy for him.
Do you have any comments about the weaponry? I mean, the M16, apparently there were some problems with the M16 early on.
Yeah, the early ones, I think they tended to jam when they got dirty. The newer ones, they corrected a lot of that. Although, as a matter of fact, I even read that this morning on the internet, that the Americans liked using the AK-47s, which was the communist weapon, rather than, they felt it was a better weapon than the M16. And of course the ones we had or ones that the NVA had were the Chi-Coms, not the Russian ones. They were Chinese communists, and they weren't built as well as the Russian ones. But and they still had a lot of the old SKSs, which was kind of along the lines of a First World War bolt action rifle. So they weren't as well equipped as we were. Matter of fact, a lot of us had a lot of respect for the NVA. They were good fighters, but they put up with a lot more adversity than we did. They didn't have helicopters bringing them food every 5 days. That's why they used to come into villages at night to get rice and food, to keep themselves fed. So they put up with a lot of adversity. That they had you'd see they didn't have fatigues. They wore shorts and sandals. Interestingly enough, though, being as they were communist, they had a different take on military discipline. In our army, the officer gives you a command. You do it. Period. No, you don't question it. In the NVA, they would have meetings like the officers would meet with the enlisted men and have sessions of how are we doing? Can we do any better? That kind of thing. We never did that. You were just, the officer tells you to jump, you how high. But I'm getting my timelines a little confused here. I'm jumping ahead, and I want to come back to a couple things. So we spent our time. We were out a good two months or 3 months in the villages, and they finally brought us back in for a stand down.
And you're just sleeping in the jungle. You're just sleeping with a tarp over you or something?
We had ponchos, which were sort of a rubbery kind of material, and we had poncho liner, which I still have one. I use it at home when I'm laying on the couch. But that was, I don't know how to describe it exactly, but it was very light, in the jungle, like when we were out in the Ashaw Valley, and even when we were setting up the ambushes around the villages, we weren't allowed to use the ponchos to sleep on because they made too much noise. So we have to wrap up in the poncho liner. It was the best we had, which could be soaking wet because a lot of times you'd sleep in the rain all night, But stealth was one of our big things. I know when we went out to the Ashaw, you didn't talk above a whisper. I mean, for months sometimes, like that, because you didn't want anybody to hear you talking that wasn't supposed to hear you talking. So, but we came back in, I guess, after a couple months around the villages, They had steaks and beer for us, you know. And again, Charger, our battalion commander, he gave a speech and he said, I got cold beer for you and hot steaks. You guys got 48 hours here. I don't care if you get drunk and tear this base camp down. I got a bunch of REMFs back here, got nothing to do but rebuild it anyway. A REMF, by the way, was a rear echelon MF. Meaning, you know, the clerks and got, you know, which I became one of them when I got my job in the base camp. But there was a few other guys that were kind of like me that got lucky and got a position in the base camp. And we were very bored with life in the base camp. You know, it was too safe. So we used to do things like in the middle of the night, we'd rob the mess hall, get big bolognas and stuff, and which wasn't good because the mess hall sergeant slept in the mess hall with an M16. He shot at us a couple times.
Wow.
You know, but we were too quick for him. I broke my foot that way though. They had a deuce and a half pulled up with ice. Now ice were in blocks about this big and maybe 4 feet long, pretty heavy. So one guy jumped up in the deuce and a half. He's going to throw the ice down because the driver had gone inside, and he's yelling at me, "Hey, Conway, just catch that." Weighs a ton, right? So I caught it. It slipped right out of my hands and hit my foot. So I limped over to the aid station, and they just wrapped some of that, what do they call that, stretch tape, like
bandages or something.
Not a bandage. It's in a roll.
Okay.
I know there's a name for it, but I can't think of what it is. And that's why I walked around for a while. I had to make up a story about how I hurt my foot. You know, I couldn't admit I was stealing ice. And it wasn't until after I was out of the service, I twisted my ankle real bad playing basketball. And they went and x-rayed it. And the x-ray guy says, "You know you have an old healed fracture on your foot?" I didn't even know I broke my foot.
How about that?
You know? But so anyway, he was Colonel was correct. We got drunk and ripped up the base camp for a couple of days, and then we went back out in the field. See, I told you a story about by the river. Yeah, we eventually, sometime in the spring of 1969, we went out to the Ashaw. Now, the Ashaw Valley was a very bad place. It was about 30 miles long, ridge lines on both sides, and the whole floor of the valley was covered with the results of B-52 strikes. I mean, there's craters there you could have drove a truck into. Remember the first day we were there, we walked the whole valley, and I couldn't believe the size of these craters. But if you mention the Ashaw to anybody that's been out there, they'd like, oh, you know. Special Forces camp got overrun out there. Marines had a tough time out there. Now it was our turn, you know. But we made a combat assault into the Ashaw, which means we came in the helicopters, and they had Cobra gunships circling around, and outside that perimeter they had F-4s circling around. So it was, I'd never seen anything like that before. It was like the tourists in New York City for the first time. Like that, all this firepower going off. So at any rate, we made the combat assault, and I guess we chased some NVA units out of the area before we even got there. So we patrolled for a while. This is another one of these instances where I shouldn't be here right now. This one was very close. We walked into some NVA and got pinned down. We were behind a big berm, and of course most of them ran off. And one guy, I think he was wounded. They left him behind. So after things kind of settled down. So the lieutenant said we're going to come over the berm and make a sweep across the area, which is what we were doing. And there was a tree line, and I could see the one NVA. We thought he was dead, laying there. And as we're about halfway across the open area, and the lieutenant came up and tapped me on the shoulder. He said, "Conway, move left." So I did a sidestep, and he came up right where I was standing. At that point, this NVA guy that we thought was dead wasn't. And he sat up and pumped 2 rounds right into the lieutenant's stomach. And that should have been me.
Wow.
You know, it was just a act of God or whatever. You know, so there wasn't anything left of that guy by the time we were done. We pulled back, you know. It was right at the end of the day. You know, the sun was going down, and medevac pilots didn't want to fly out to the A-show at night. So we took turns holding them. If you've ever, how can I put this? If you ever held a dying man in your arms, you know, for that. Anyway, some full bird colonel from the aviation battalion flew a medevac out, probably in the middle of the night, and we finally got the lieutenant out of there. That's tough. That's a memory that doesn't go away.
Those moments that you're just describing, I get the sense that, you know, what was the famous expression? It's 90% boredom and 10% pure terror.
Yeah, that's the life of an infantryman. It's, the long periods of boredom punctuated by sheer terror. Different ways of phrasing it.
Yeah.
That's pretty true. You know, that's pretty true. But then we rucked up, moved on. That's what we did after all was over. We spent, I spent the rest of my time in the field out there until I got the call to, got the job back in the base camp, you know. So we found, the NVA were just staying a step ahead of us. We found commo wires strung for miles. Commo, like a telephone wire, you know, and followed it for miles, and then we get to a camp that was deserted, you know. So, but I will say one thing: we set up a perimeter right on the Laotian border, because the Ashau Valley bordered on, you know, Vietnam was very, very slim at that point. And when our government was saying we had no troops in Laos, we spent 2 weeks running patrols into Laos. Actually, we were trying to cut off the Ho Chi Minh Trail. That's what we were trying to do, you know. So, at any rate, I got my job in the base camp, and almost got killed in the base camp. They're making a transition into the air mobile concept. That was all pretty new. It was 101st and the 1st Cav were the first units to do this. So they had brought a helicopter in to teach us rappelling and extraction with helicopters. Now that the LRP teams, the long range recon patrol guys, have been doing this for quite a while. And basically, rappelling, you'd be 60 feet. The chopper was 60 feet up in the air, and you come down the ropes to the ground. And extraction was kind of the same thing, where they dropped 3 ropes, they had like a noose on the end of it, and you had this thing called a Maguire rig, and you wrap it around your through your crotch and your waist with a carabiner. You'd hook onto the rope, and then the helicopter would take off. You never got in the helicopter. You just hung there 60 feet below it until you got to wherever you were going to land. And so we went up, flying around 1,000 feet up in the air, flying around Camp Eagle, and realized, okay, I'm the middle guy, and there's one guy in each end. Now, if those guys put their arms out like this, you could actually control. You could start make yourself flying like that. So we're like, oh, this is really cool, you know. So we come back, and when they landed, they didn't come down straight like a helicopter does. They'd come in like a plane. You'd hit the ground, and you have to run till it stopped, and then unhook yourself from the lines and walk away. So what we did. As we were walking away, the engine quit on the helicopter. And I don't know how this pilot did it, but he must have got it started right away, but that thing came down like a rock. Wham! Hit the ground. Bounced about 10 feet up in the air, come down, hit the ground again, bounced up in the air about 5 feet. Somehow he got those blades turning, you know, where they were generating lift. And I remember looking at the helicopter, and it just stopped and started shaking, and then it flew away like nothing happened. Now we're back to the old thing about after a firefight, you know, where I'm like, 60 seconds ago we were 1,000 feet up in the air. Wow. What the hell? You know? No. But so I had a pretty good last few months in the base camp. We had you know, they used to lob rockets in on us, but it wasn't anything like when we were in the field. Matter of fact, when I did the job of the battalion mail clerk, I had to work in the message center. It was just me and another guy, and Tex, his name, big, tall, lanky guy. Should have been a cowboy. And I had to have a top secret clearance just to work in there. So if we had incoming rounds come in, everybody else had to go get their rifles and run into the trenches, you know, prepare for being overrun. Except Tex and I, our orders were if we got overrun, we had to burn down the message center, which we would do by, we had Willie Peter, white phosphorus grenades. And I don't know if you know anything about that stuff, but once you throw it, you can't put it out, you know. But that was our job. The way we accomplished it was we'd have 2 chairs outside the building, you know, with cigarettes and beer. You know? That's how we did our job. You know?
So approaching the end of your time there, you know that when you get the day you get there, you know the day you're leaving, right? I mean, it's exactly 12 months.
Pretty much, yeah. It could be off a few days.
Yeah. And were you looking forward to that time to leave Vietnam?
Yeah, of course, you know, which was odd because the day it actually happened, I often said was, maybe you won't understand this, but it was the happiest and the saddest day of my life.
Happy, I can understand. Sad?
Because I was leaving something I know I'd never experience again in my life. And I was leaving guys that I experienced those things with.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know how to put it into words exactly. You know.
Well,
I did want to tell you one story though.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm going to back up a little bit. About a young Vietnamese fella. He was our Kit Carson scout. Now, to explain that a little bit, they were Vietnamese who came to work for us. Some of them had been North Vietnamese that surrendered to us. The Army had what they called Chu Hoi program. I think Chu Hoi meant open arms. And they dropped pamphlets and stuff. I mean, whereas the NVA guys could come to our side, we wouldn't shoot them, you know. And well, that's how Hung, that was his name, came to us. But he wasn't an NVA soldier. He had been kidnapped by the NVA, and they held him in a cave to work as a medic for 6 months in one of their tunnel complexes. We escaped from that, and he came to us and became our Kit Carson scout. Now he knew the area, he knew the villages and whatnot, so he pretty much led us into out on these ambushes, and Hung knew what he was doing. If Hung went like this, we knew he stopped, you know. And the thing I liked about him so much was that he was a regular guy. He's a regular GI. He was lazy. He hated work. Complained about everything, just like the rest of us, you know. And also, we all really liked Hung quite a bit. And he finally got some leave time, and he went back to his home village. Now, the North Vietnamese knew about him, that he was the guy that escaped and was working for us. They had a lot of information on us. They had our company roster. I don't know how they ever got that, but they had a price on our head. And so our battalion motto was "No slack," which I think I have it on here. And they told the villagers they had 1,000 piastres or something on the head of anybody from No Slack. You know, it's the only time in my life I had a price on my head. Wow. You know, at any rate, Hung went home to his village, and one night they came in the village, and they tied him up to a tree and executed him. And our guys went nuts over that. We right after that, we were going to go, they gave us the go-ahead to go up to the Bakhma, which was an old French resort on a hilltop overlooking the South China Sea. And the South Vietnamese government wouldn't let us touch it because they wanted to keep it for themselves after the war. Well, we finally got the okay to go up there, and we were told by our military that they wanted prisoners so they could get intelligence information out of them. And every guy in our platoon said, "No, we're not taking any prisoners. This is for Hung." You know? And we went up there and found out that these guys had a little vacation thing going on. They had radar-controlled anti-aircraft guns up there they were using against us. You know, so we went up there and changed all that. You know, but that Hung, I think one of the saddest things is that his name's not on the wall in Washington. But he wasn't American. You know, so. That's pretty much sums it up, I think. You know.
Well, I want to ask you about what it was like to come home and what it's been like up to the present.
Yeah. I'd like to get into that.
Well, what was it like to come home?
Well, I went back to the 90th Replacement Battalion down in Long Binh, and they just stuck you in there like a herd of cattle until your name was called. And every 2 hours, you had to make a shipping formation. That was around the clock. So you never really got much sleep. Every 2 hours, they come in and wake you up. You have to go to this big room and wait, and your name wasn't called, and you went back, you know, get another 2 hours sleep. Well, after 48 hours of this, my name was finally called, but I was not in a good mood. You know, hardly any sleep, and just boredom and stuff. So I got on a bus. That was another experience. I almost got in trouble. Got a military bus. A Vietnamese guy was driving it. So this Sergeant E6 was like the bus commander, let's say. And this guy had, I mean, come on, he had shined shoes and stuff. You know, he wasn't ever in the field. But he had an M16. Didn't know what he was doing because he was sitting the driver was here, and he was sitting this way, facing the driver from the side, and he sits down, puts the M16 like this on his lap, which is actually pointing at the driver, takes the safety off and puts his finger on the trigger. Well, you don't do that. Even in the field when we were patrolling, we kept the safety on, and the only time you put your finger on the trigger was when you're going to pull it. Other than that, you just laid your finger out straight, you know. Well, I had to say something to this guy, and he's yelling at me, and, you know, I told him he was a fool. Probably he didn't like that. But he threatened, you know, Article 15 on me.
What's that?
Article 15 is a non-judiciary punishment. In other words, you don't go in through the Army justice system. You don't go before a judge, but your commander can make a decision on what you might be demoted a rank, or, you know, forfeit some pay or stuff like that, you know. And so I finally realized that I'm not going to change his mind. And I told him, it says, well, I hope you can live with the fact that when you hit a bump, you're going to blow that guy's head off. You know. So I just sat down, made the bus ride, got on a plane in Tonsanute, and we were going to fly back to Yokota and then back to San Francisco. So now I've been up for 48 hours. I'm in a bad mood. I'm pissed off because of this thing in the bus. And I get on this plane, and I'm like a 22-hour flight back, you know. So I'm not, you know, happy. Well, the stewardess on the plane, maybe a couple of them, I don't remember now, they knew I was coming home from Vietnam, you know, they could tell by the uniform. And they were trying everything they could to make me comfortable. And I was just a rotten, no good SOB, you know. Would you like a magazine? No, I don't want a magazine, you know, like that. And to this day, I wish I could find that stewardess to apologize to her, because she was trying to be as kind as she could, and I was rotten.
I think I missed something, because when you leave Vietnam, isn't the plane full of soldiers?
Yeah.
But why are they treating you particularly nice? Or are they treating everybody?
Everybody, yeah, pretty much.
And it's a commercial airline, so there are stewardesses with the stewardess uniforms on?
Yeah, this was on a commercial airline, not a contract airline, like Flying Tiger.
Oh.
You know. And also, well, I flew to San Francisco, but I was still in a bad mood after we got there. I had to go to Oakland Army Base. Now I'm up for another 12 hours, processing out and getting a new uniform. I flew home in fatigues or the Class Bs. Well, they issued me a Class A uniform, you know, with the tie and jacket and all like that. Yeah. And then I flew military standby back to Newark. So again, that was a commercial airline, you know, and I probably wasn't in any better mood then. I do remember walking up a ramp, and there was a whole platoon of soldiers coming down the ramp. I know they were going to Vietnam, and they could see I had just come from Vietnam, you know, and I'm kind of like on my duffel bag up here. Well, I know what pissed me off, the zipper broke on my pants, and I had nothing I could do about it, you know. So I was mad about that too. So I'm walking along, and these guys are walking the other way, and I still see the looks on their faces. Oh my God, am I going to look like that? So anyway, after all that, I flew into Newark, and my mother and I had lived in East Orange with my aunt, and so I told I got a cab, you know. And first thing that happened was the cab driver wanted more money, because I said, I'm going to East Orange. He goes, are you sure you're not going to Bloomfield? No, why would I do that? He says, well, I get more money to go to Bloomfield. And I'm like, I don't care, I'm going to East Orange, you know. Well, actually, my aunt's house was right on the border, you know. Now, was I ever spit on or any of that stuff at the airport? No. But then again, I was usually going through there at night, you know, middle of the night. I do know. I do know that we had a new battalion executive officer when I was in Vietnam. That our old exec was going home. We were getting this new guy coming in, and he was second tour in Vietnam, and he had been a Green Beret his first tour. And so we were all like, "Oh my God, this guy's going to be hard ass," you know, and stuff. And it wasn't the case. The first day he walked into our hooch, he turned his softball cap around backwards and said, "Peace." He was the coolest guy I ever was. But he told me that when he went home from his first tour, he had the drug-crazed baby killers throwing bags of stuff on him and all that. And he beat a couple of them up pretty bad. But the cops were like, "We'll take care of it. Don't worry about it." You know, they didn't even bother him. But I never experienced that exactly like that. But I think what bothered me was the complete indifference that I experienced. You know, I'd home, I'd run into somebody. "Oh, I haven't seen you for a while. Where you been?" Well, you know, that just bothered me, you know. And I got to the point where I wouldn't even talk about it. And I went to work for a friend of mine, had a couple of coffee wagons. And the route I had over in Jersey, I stopped at this one gas station every day. And the one guy, the mechanic that worked there, was a World War II vet. And when he found out I was in Vietnam, he said, "How many of those little yellow bastards did you kill?" I said, "What the hell business is that of yours? I'm not going to tell you about that." And that actually drove me into the closet, so to speak. You know, I wouldn't talk. If anybody asked me if I was in the service, yeah, I was in the Army. "Where were you?" "I was overseas." And that was the end of the conversation. You know, actually, I think my wife and I were married several years before I actually told her I was in Vietnam. She knew I was in the Army, but, you know. So that's something I had to deal with, you know. It was my own personal hell. You know, all the memories were up there. But I didn't realize, well, there's a lot of guys like me walking around out there. And fast forward to around 1990 or so, I finally got up the courage to go to the wall down in Washington. And back then, they allowed like veterans groups to set up tables along where the wall was, you know. And they don't do that anymore, but so I'm really hesitant. You know, I didn't even get to the wall yet. And there was a table there from the 101st Airborne Division Association. So I had something, I had the Screaming Eagle on a shirt or whatever. And I saw that, and I just walked over. And these guys are like, "Hey, brother, welcome home, man. What unit were you with, you know?" And I stood there. I couldn't speak. And I broke out. I cried. I lost it. Biggest group hug you'd ever seen, man. 15 guys out there like this, you know. So I cried for the next 4 hours. And that helped me a lot when I realized I'm not alone anymore. And I went through some counseling, 18-week group therapy counseling at the Vet Center in Scranton. That helped a lot, you know, kind of put things in perspective. Mm-hmm. It's still there. It's still there every day. Something pops up every day, you know, but you deal with it. And now I'm in a position where I'm president of the VVA chapter. So, you know, sometimes I have to deal with other people's woes, but I have to be strong for them, you know. And with the Valor Clinic, there for a while, I was going to that Veterans Unstoppable program, and again, you know, having to deal with most of the time younger, well, I say younger, they're probably in their 40s now, vets like that. So, you know, you just gotta do what you gotta do, you know.
You know, I've talked to a couple of you guys now, and one of the things that struck me in all of you guys are that sense of camaraderie that you have with other Army guys, that you guys have experienced something that the rest of us haven't experienced, and only you guys can sort of understand it, and that gives you like a bond. Am I saying that correctly?
Yeah, we chewed some of the same dirt.
Yeah.
You know, that's true. They say a vet will only open up to another vet. That's pretty much true.
Mm-hmm.
You know? I mean, there are some things I left out that I saw when I was in the field, you know, but I didn't feel it would be totally appropriate for what we're doing here today.
Okay.
You know.
Well, if you want to talk about them, we're willing to listen.
Just the aftermath of a firefight, you know, and having to strip and search bodies. I mean, I wasn't ready for that.
The enemy.
Yeah. And
why did you have to strip and search them? I mean, maybe there's more to it than what comes to the imagination.
well, we were looking for any kind of intel they may have, paperwork, anything, weapons. Most of them carried a little stash of some pretty good stuff.
Marijuana?
Yeah.
No kidding.
Or yeah, marijuana, hash, things like that.
Yeah.
You know, so and everybody wanted to get that, but then again, you know, the Army took it away from us.
But they must not have taken it all away from you.
Depends on whether the officer was cool or not. You know, but that wasn't really a big thing with us in my unit.
Drugs? No.
Yeah, not really. A little bit. We had the juicers and the heads. I was a juicer.
Yeah.
You know. Of course, most of the time we couldn't drink. Didn't have anything to drink anyway.
Right.
Every 5 days when the choppers would come out to resupply us, they'd bring a can of beer and a can of soda for each guy in the platoon. Now those cans probably sat out on a helicopter pad in the hot sun for hours before they were transported, and they were warm, but it was still the best tasting beer you ever had. You know. One of the other things I didn't, and this is a good thing, not a bad thing. When we were up in the A Shaw at night, we'd set up our perimeter like 3-man positions, you know, around a mountaintop. And we'd have what they call stand down. It was at 6 o'clock every night. You know, we'd have a little sea rats to eat. And somebody in military circles decided that 6 o'clock at night is the prime time that the NVA would attack us. Well, the truth of the matter is that they didn't. They were doing the same thing we were doing, just kicking back, you know. So what we used to do is make a big cup of coffee. They had instant coffee, and you know, you had a canteen cup that fit your canteen fit in it. So everybody would throw in a packet of coffee and some water, and we'd make up a big, huge cup of this. And we had heat tabs, by the way. You could make a little boonie stove out of a sea ration can. Just kind of, you know, hit it with the can opener, open up around the bottom, and then it became a stove.
Ah.
And you put the heat tab in there, and the heat tabs would burn but not give off any smoke, so you didn't give away your position. So we heat up the coffee, and then we sit, 3 or 4 of us sitting around, just passing that coffee mug around. Totally quiet. We weren't supposed to talk or anything during that time. So it wasn't, to us, it wasn't like we're going to get overrun. To us, it's like, wow, isn't it pretty watching the sun go down over the A-Shaw? That kind of thing. I've never experienced anything like that since. That's a good memory.
Yeah, interesting. What was it like being in the jungle? I mean, did you have to worry about snakes? Did you have to worry about, what was it? I mean, it's not like the woods here in Pennsylvania, right?
Well, they had some things over there they had a snake called a two-stepper. If you got bit, you had 2 steps to live. It was very, very venomous. I saw one once, but never got that close to it. Had some interesting insect life. I remember when we went up on that mountain up above Da Nang, where we got stuck up there for a few days at Christmas time. I saw a walking stick. You know what that is, right?
An insect, yeah.
They're about how big?
Right, yeah.
This thing was like this big. Everything up there was gigantic. And they had something that came out at night. I never saw one because it was always at night. I used to call them B-52s because they'd be flying. You could hear them. They made a noise like that. And I remember laying there, where I had my one leg out, my other leg like this, and one flew into my leg, hit it so hard that I flipped over.
Oh.
I have no idea what it looked like. Never saw one other than hearing them at night. So there, leeches. Oh my God, that's disgusting. Leeches everywhere. If we say walk through a river, at a ford or river, we get to the other side. Everybody would have to drop their rucksacks and peel their fatigue blouses off and start picking the leeches off each other.
Okay.
And sometimes sport. They had the bug juice. It was like DEET. It worked pretty good, but the leeches didn't like it. Sometimes you have to burn them off. But I said, you ever see pictures of monkeys take, what would you call that? Like taking the bugs off their fellow monkey.
Yeah.
That's what it
grooming each other.
Yeah, that's what it reminded me of.
Yeah. Huh.
I hate the thought of leeches. I had 6 of them right here, and got them off, but it had opened up my skin. Well, the trouble is, my LBE gear. That's your belt and all the it was rubbing up against it. And it took forever to heal. I still had it. I remember when I went to Australia on R&R, I still had that. It was still not healed. So it took probably a couple months.
I could imagine you could tell stories for a long time. I mean, I'm not going to shut you down if you want to talk about them. Is there something I should have asked you about that maybe you were hoping to talk about and we haven't gotten there yet?
There's something roaming around in my mind, but you got to remember, I have a little problem with memory. I was diagnosed 2-3 years ago with Parkinson's disease, which is presumptive to Agent Orange. So I have all these symptoms of Parkinson's. My left leg doesn't work properly, lack of memory, and some things like that. And so here earlier this year, or last year, I had to go to the Philadelphia VA for a nuclear brain scan. They don't do that up here in Wilkes-Barre. I really didn't like going to Philadelphia, to be honest with you. But this thing, they call it a camera. They put it right up in your face, like a flat screen, and they take all these pictures. So I got a call from them. They're saying that, according to what they see, I don't have Parkinson's. Why do I have all these symptoms of it? So just a week ago, Yeah. Last Tuesday, I had to go back to the Philadelphia VA to see a Parkinson's neurologist, and so I talked to her for quite a while, and she did an interview, and then we did tests where a lot of it was maybe just check my cognitive abilities, such as she'd read a series of numbers, and I'd have to read them back to her, and then she'd read me another series of numbers, but then you have to put them in numerical order and then read them back, just things like that. The one that really got me was they had pages of red, green, and blue letters. Well, actually spelled out. The red was red, the green was green, the blue was blue. And I had to go from one to the other and tell her which order they were in. They changed order all the time. That wasn't so bad. But then they had one where the red one might be colored green, and the green one might be colored blue. And I had to not read the letter, but read the color. And that that wore me out, I think. But I will talk to her next Friday, I think. And she's supposed to call me with the results, because something's not right. I know that. You know, this walking business. That's why I have the cane and the walker. I use a walker also if I'm going to go any distance. You know, and it's just I'm tired of dealing with it. You know, I have to be careful at home. If I have like an island and then in the kitchen, you know, and if I'm walking around the island, between the island and the counter, and I'll do this without thinking, I go to twist to the left, my leg goes out from underneath me. Just thank God I'm like right by the counter, I can catch myself, you know. So, and I can't walk any distance, you know. I was looking at a video on YouTube about 27 places in Pennsylvania you should see, and 25 of them had walking trails. I can't do it. I'd love to be able to do that, you know, but I can't do it because just a short distance walking, even with the walker, I get such bad pain in my hips that I end up walking like a weeble, you know, and I mean, it's tears in your eyes kind of pain, you know, and so far, over the past couple of years, I have gotten no answer, no definitive answer on it, or what I can do to, you know, to fix it. I know they said my hips are okay. Wilkes-Barre did the x-rays on my hips, and they said, there's nothing wrong with your hips. A little arthritis, that's about it, you know. But then why do I walk funny, you know? That's, and then I get answers like, well, maybe your pain is not in your hips, maybe it's coming from up here. Maybe. You know, and I don't know. Yeah. All I know is that I'm a victim of Agent Orange, like a lot of other people. Yeah. Pretty nasty stuff, you know. We was not a good legacy that we left over there, because children born to Vietnamese Army veterans are born with birth defects, identical to children born of American vets. You know, it's all because of Agent Orange. You know, that stuff's in the water supply over there. You know.
Well, I think it's a good place to start to wind this down. Do you have any final comments?
Yes, I would like to say one thing. You kind of touched on it before when you asked about how I felt about, well, when I was younger. April is the 50th anniversary of the end of the Vietnam War. I mean, 73 we signed the peace accords, and then they violated them. So But by 75, we had pulled all of our troops out, and there was the evacuation of Saigon.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that was it. We were done. When people talk about we lost the war, well, we didn't. We won every battle, all the big battles. You know, I say we, I mean the soldiers. Our government is the one that lost it. They didn't really lose it. They just decided, oh, we're not going to fight anymore. Let's go home. You know, so there was no definitive win or loss. But to me, we didn't lose. We did our jobs valiantly. There was, I think, around 60% enlistees and 40% draftees in the war. And everybody did their job. I mean, there's a few bad actors, yes, here and there. But, you know, for the most part, the vast majority of us did our jobs honorably. You know, but one thing that's never really considered, and this is my opinion, we did leave a legacy behind in Vietnam. And that legacy was entrepreneurship, capitalism. When the North Vietnamese, or what was North Vietnam, the communist leaders took over South Vietnam, they tried to institute hardline communism. It didn't work. Matter of fact, at one point I worked for Five Star Equipment. It was a John Deere construction equipment dealership. And I remember reading an article in the John Deere magazine they put out about how when the communists took over, all these farmers in South Vietnam, they had old John Deere tractors, old Johnny Poppers and stuff like that. They buried them because the communists took over the ownership of the farms. They didn't want their tractors to fall into their hands. So they actually literally buried them in the ground. And when the communist regime fell, and Vietnam kind of reverted to more of a socialism, and they gave the ownership of the farms back to the farmers. They dug up all these tractors. John Deere was having a field day, sending parts to Vietnam to keep these things running, you know. So they understood, you know, capitalism. The other thing is the black market in Vietnam was very thriving. You know, there was times we couldn't get boots, or we couldn't get poncho liners, but you could go into the black market and buy a jacket made out of a poncho liner. All the Vietnamese, the Arvins, the South Vietnamese, they all had brand new jungle boots. We couldn't get new boots, you know. So the black market, which was of course illegal, but to me it points out how they grasped entrepreneurship. Now, fast forward to today, go look up some photographs of Vietnam today. Saigon, or Ho Chi Minh City now, it looks like New York. Skyscrapers everywhere. The Trang, the old French resort city, which was, a lot of guys wanted to be assigned in something in the Trang because it was beautiful. And plus, there was these old hotels there. The Army had put you up in the old hotel, so you were living large. But today, the beachfront there is all high-rise resorts. Everywhere. They never would have developed that without our leadership and what we showed them about entrepreneurship.
So it sounds like you're a little conflicted about the U.S.'s role. On the one hand, it's good, but on the other hand, the Agent Orange stuff.
Well, it was horribly. It was run horribly. First of all, you don't run a war from Washington. You know, and was one of the biggest problems. Now, you did Glenn's interview a while back. Well, I was there a couple of years before Glenn, right? And we've often talked about the differences. Now, they had around the villages, if they got shot at, they had to call in for permission to return fire. We didn't. There was a village, and everything outside the village was a free kill zone. We didn't have to call for permission to return fire. So they, over time, they're putting more and more ridiculous regulations on how to fight a war, from Washington.
I think it was Glenn that told me it's no longer search and destroy, it's whatever the...
Recon and force.
Recon, yeah.
It was. When I got there, it was search and destroy. And the Army felt that it didn't sound good on the 6 o'clock news, so they changed it to recon and force. They were even, at one time, they told us we weren't allowed to talk to reporters. If any reporters showed up, we had to refer them to the higher ups, which is a very good scene from one of the best Hollywood movies about Vietnam. It's Hamburger Hill. I don't know if you've seen it or not, but it's a true story. It took place while I was there. I was not in Hamburger Hill. I was a couple hills over. I had a friend of mine I went through infantry school with. I ran into him after Vietnam, and he was there, and it was bad, And matter of fact, in the Screaming Eagle newspaper, I have it at home. I think it's June 1969. The assault on Dong Hoc Bia, which was the Vietnamese name for Hamburger Hill, and stuff that's in that article was in that movie. Like when it rained and they were trying to climb up the hill and they were rolling down the hill in the mud, things like that. That was one of the most realistic Vietnam movies. That and We Were Soldiers with what's his name? Oh.
I saw the movie, but I don't remember
Mel Gibson. Who
Mel
played
Gibson,
it.
yeah.
And he played Colonel Hal Moore, who actually retired as General Hal Moore. And Colonel Hal Moore was the advisor on that movie. So that movie was very, very factual. But as far as I'm concerned, the rest of the Vietnam movies are Hollywood crap.
Yeah.
So, I had something else I wanted to say there. I can't remember. Got off on a tangent now. Yeah, I guess my point was, in my opinion, and take an opinion for what it's worth, that we were responsible for Vietnam now actually in the world market challenging Korea and Japan.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
They've come a long way,
Yeah.
and they are very industrious workers.
Mm-hmm.
So I admire that, and
have you been back? Do you have any desire to go back?
I'd love to go back, but I've never been able to afford it. It's a lot of money to go back. I would like to go back and see some of the areas I was in as a tourist, not as a soldier, because there's some beautiful places. Matter of fact, when we were down on the coastal plains, we moved south to a village we'd never been in before. And when we got down to this village, it was right on the coast. We were actually on the beach of the South China Sea. And it was mountains that came right down like this to the ocean. And there was this inlet, and it wasn't big waves, it was gentle waves lapping on the beach. And we were like, oh my God, it's beautiful. So we were all getting ready, because we were going to hang out there for the day. We were going to start ripping our clothes off and running in the water, to get clean. Well, about that point, old Mama-san from the village was walking out, walked right through us, smiling, walks out into the water, drops her drawers and does her business. And she didn't think anything of it, but it kind of killed our plans for surfing.
That would be an interesting story to end on. Okay, final words.
Final words. Well, I would encourage everybody to take advantage of what Tanya has set up here, because it's good to talk about it, especially guys that don't want to let it out, which to me is a sad thing, because I know it hurts coming out because I've been through it, but you're better off for it. It doesn't go away, but you're able to kind of put it in perspective a little bit better, and not let it get you down. So I would encourage everybody to take advantage of what we're doing, to sit down here for the sole reason of leaving our legacy behind, so that people in the future, I'm 77 years old, I'm going to face the fact we're not going to be around forever here. So now is the time to get our stories down, about our service and about our life after Vietnam, how it affected us, and that this is something I just feel that we need to leave these stories behind, because what Hollywood did to us is not true. There was no Rambo. We were just a bunch of guys that did our jobs, so that's pretty much what I think I'd like to end with.
All right, well, that's excellent place to end. Thanks very much.
You're welcome very much.
Yeah, thanks. That was